The forest swallowed me whole, its shadows clawing at my courage as the last sliver of daylight bled out. My flashlight flickered, a weak pulse against the suffocating dark, and my phone had been dead for hours. I was alone, lost in the Cascades, with no map, no plan, and a gnawing fear that I'd never find my way out. My name is Lucas Harper, a 24-year-old graphic designer from Seattle who thought a solo hike would recharge me after a brutal breakup. I'd been dumped by my boyfriend of 3 years, Nate, who said I was too much and not enough in the same breath. So, I packed a bag, drove to the edge of Mount Rainier National Park, and started walking, chasing some romantic notion of finding myself in the wilderness. Big mistake. By noon, I'd wandered off the trail, my compass spinning uselessly, and now, as night fell, the forest felt like a living thing, watching, waiting. I stumbled over a root, my ankle twisting with a sharp jolt of pain. Shit, I hissed, collapsing onto the damp earth. The cold seeped through my jacket, and the distant howl of something, coyote, wolf, my imagination, sent my heart racing. I clutched my flashlight, its beams stuttering like my own hope. I was screwed. No one knew I was out here. No one was coming. Then, a rustle. Not the wind, not an animal, deliberate, human. My breath caught as I swung the flashlight toward the sound. A figure stood at the edge of the beam, half hidden by pines. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a worn flannel jacket and boots caked with mud. A rifle rested casually over his shoulder, and his face, shadowed by a scruffy beard, was unreadable. My first thought was danger. My second was salvation. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throb in my ankle. The figure stepped closer, and the light caught his eyes. Hazel, steady, almost too calm. "You're a long way from the trail," he said, his voice low, gravelly, with a faint drawl I couldn't place. "You hurt?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yeah, twisted my ankle. I'm lost." He studied me for a moment, like he was weighing whether I was worth the trouble. Then he nodded. "Name's Elias. Come with me. I've got a cabin not far." I hesitated. Follow a stranger with a gun into the woods? Every horror movie screamed no, but the alternative was freezing out here, or worse. "Okay," I said, barely above a whisper. Elias turned, motioning for me to follow. I limped after him, the forest closing in behind us. He moved with a quiet confidence, like he belonged to this wild place. I didn't know if I was walking toward safety or something else entirely, but I had no choice. My fear was a weight, heavy and cold, and yet, as I watched Elias's silhouette against the trees, a strange warmth flickered in my chest. The walk was brutal. My ankle screamed with every step, and the air grew colder, my breath puffing in clouds. Elias didn't speak, just glanced back now and then to make sure I was keeping up. After what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, we reached a clearing. A small cabin sat tucked against a rocky outcrop, its windows glowing faintly with firelight. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the sight of it nearly broke me with relief. "Inside," Elias said, holding the door open. I stepped into warmth, the scent of pine and wood smoke wrapping around me. The cabin was sparse but cozy, a single room with a fireplace, a wooden table, a cot in the corner, and shelves lined with books and jars. A deer pelt hung on one wall, a reminder of where I was. "Sit," Elias said, pointing to a chair by the fire. I obeyed, too tired to argue. He knelt by my foot, his hands surprisingly gentle as he eased off my boot. I winced, and he glanced up, his eyes catching mine for a moment too long. "Just a sprain," he said, standing. "I'll wrap it. Stay put." As he rummaged through a cabinet, I studied him. He was older than me, maybe mid-30s, with a ruggedness that spoke of years in the wild. His hands were calloused, his movements precise, like someone who'd learned to survive by instinct. But there was something else, a quiet sadness in the way he carried himself, like he was hiding from more than just the world. "Why do you live out here?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Elias paused, his back to me. "It's quiet," he said simply. "No one bothers you." He turned, holding a roll of bandage, and knelt again to wrap my ankle. His fingers brushed my skin, and I shivered, not from the cold. We didn't talk much that first night. He gave me a bowl of stew, venison, and potatoes, and a blanket to wrap around myself. I ate in silence, the fire crackling between us. My fear was still there, but it was softening, melting under the warmth of the flames and the strange, unspoken kindness of this man who owed me nothing. As I drifted toward sleep on the cot, Elias sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound was oddly soothing, a rhythm that anchored me. I didn't know who he was or why he'd taken me in, but for the first time in hours, I felt safe. And yet, a question lingered, sharp as the blade in his hands. What was he running from? I woke to the smell of coffee and the soft crackle of the fire. My ankle throbbed, but the pain was duller, wrapped tightly in Elias's bandage. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, painting the wooden floor in gold. Elias stood at the stove, his back to me, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. For a moment, I just watched him, the way his shoulders moved under his flannel, the quiet focus in his routine. It felt like I'd stumbled into someone else's life, one far removed from my own. "Morning," I said, my voice rough from sleep. He turned, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Coffee." He held up the mug. I nodded, sitting up on the cot. "Thanks. For everything." He handed me the mug, his fingers brushing mine briefly. "You're not out of the woods yet," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. It was the first hint of humor I'd seen from him, and it caught me off guard. As I sipped the coffee, strong, bitter, perfect, I glanced around the cabin. It was more lived in than I'd noticed last night. A dog-eared copy of Walden sat on the table, next to a sketchbook filled with pencil drawings of the forest, trees, animals, a waterfall. They were good, detailed, almost tender. "You draw?" I asked, nodding toward the book. Elias's eyes flickered to the sketchbook, then away. "Keeps my hands busy." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. Instead, he sat across from me, sipping his own coffee. "What's your story, Lucas? Why do you think wandering the Cascades alone was a good idea?" I laughed, a hollow sound. "Stupid, right? I just needed to get away. My ex." I stopped, unsure why I was telling him this. He broke me. I thought the woods would fix it. Elias's gaze softened, just for a second. "The woods don't fix people. They just show you who you are." His words hit harder than I expected, like he'd seen right through me. I looked down at my coffee, my reflection distorted in the dark liquid. "And who are you?" I asked, daring to meet his eyes. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Someone who likes it quiet." I wanted to press him, but something in his tone told me to let it go. Instead, we ate breakfast, oatmeal with dried berries, and he checked my ankle again. His touch was steady, professional, but I couldn't ignore the warmth of his hands or the way my pulse quickened. "You can't hike out yet," he said, standing. "Not on that ankle. Stay a couple days, let it heal." I should have argued. I had a life back in Seattle, a job, an apartment. But the truth was, I didn't want to leave. Not yet. There was something about this place, about him, that felt like an anchor in the storm I'd been running from. That afternoon, Elias took me outside. The air was crisp, the forest alive with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. He showed me how to check his traps, small wire contraptions for catching rabbits. "Don't kill what you don't need," he said, resetting a trap with practiced ease. "The forest gives, but it demands respect." I nodded, watching him work. He moved like he was part of this place, every step deliberate, every glance reading the world around him. I felt clumsy in comparison, a city kid out of his depth. But when he handed me a knife to cut some kindling, his fingers lingered on mine, and I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or something deeper. That night, we sat by the fire again. He told me about the forest, about the elk that migrated through in spring, the bears that wandered too close in summer. I told him about Seattle, about designing logos for startups, about the way the city's noise could drown you. He listened, really listened, his eyes locked on mine like I was the only thing in the world. "You ever think about going back?" I asked, gesturing vaguely toward civilization. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. I had a life out there. Didn't fit. He didn't offer more, and I didn't ask. But as the flames danced, casting shadows across his face, I felt a pull toward him, a need to know the man behind the mystery. I fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, steady and sure, and dreamed of firelight and hazel eyes. The next day, my ankle was better, but I wasn't ready to leave. Elias didn't push me to go, either. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a rhythm forming in the quiet moments we shared. Mornings were for coffee and small tasks, chopping wood, checking traps. Afternoons, we walked the forest, Elias pointing out tracks or teaching me to spot edible plants. Evenings, we sat by the fire, the space between us shrinking with every story we traded. I learned more about him, though he gave it up in fragments. He'd grown up in Montana, raised by a single dad who taught him to hunt. He'd been in the army, deployed twice, though he didn't talk about it. "Some things you don't carry back," he said one night, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the weight in his words stopped me. Instead, I told him about Nate, how we'd met at a coffee shop, how I'd thought he was my future, how he'd torn me apart with a single sentence. "You're not worth it, Lucas." Elias listened, his face unreadable, but when I finished, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "He was wrong," he said, his voice firm. "You're worth more than he could see." My chest tightened, and I looked away, afraid he'd see the tears prickling my eyes. No one had said that to me, not in years. I wanted to believe him, but doubt clung to me like damp clothes. That afternoon, we hiked to a small creek, the water clear and cold as it rushed over smooth stones. Elias knelt to fill a canteen, and I watched him, the way the sunlight caught the flecks of gray in his beard, the way his hands moved with quiet strength. I didn't realize I was staring until he looked up, catching my gaze. "What?" he asked, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Nothing," I said too quickly, my face heating. "Just you're different out here." He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Different how?" I shrugged, searching for words. "Free, I guess. Like you belong." He didn't respond right away, just looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Then he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the pine and earth on him. "You could belong out here too," he said softly. My heart stuttered. I wanted to say something, anything, but the moment slipped away as he turned back to the creek, filling another canteen. I stood there, rooted, wondering what the hell was happening to me. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain pounded the cabin roof, and thunder shook the walls. I lay on the cot, wide awake, listening to the chaos outside. Elias was by the fire, sketching in his book, the pencil scratching softly. I watched him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way the firelight carved shadows across his face. "Elias," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "Yeah. Why'd you take me in?" I asked. "You didn't have to." He set the sketchbook down, leaning back in his chair. "I know what it's like to be lost," he said. "Not just in the woods." His words hung between us, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. I wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of this man who'd saved me, but the storm roared louder, and I let the moment pass. As I drifted toward sleep, the rain a steady drumbeat, I realized something. I wasn't just healing from my ankle or my breakup. I was starting to feel something new, something dangerous and thrilling for the man sitting across from me. The storm didn't let up for 2 days. The cabin became our world, a cocoon of warmth against the relentless rain. Elias taught me to play chess on a battered board he pulled from a shelf, laughing when I fumbled the rules. I taught him to sketch faces, guiding his hand as he tried to draw mine. His touch was hesitant at first, but when our fingers brushed, I felt a spark that had nothing to do with the fire. We talked more, the storm loosening something in both of us. He told me about his dad, a gruff man who loved the outdoors but struggled to connect with his son. I told him about my mom, who'd raised me alone in Seattle, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. We shared stories of first loves, first heartbreaks. I admitted I'd never felt like I fit anywhere, not in the city, not in my own skin. "You fit here," Elias said one night, his voice soft as the rain slowed to a drizzle. We were sitting on the floor by the fire, the chessboard forgotten between us. His words weren't just about the cabin or the woods. They were about us, this fragile thing growing in the quiet moments. I looked at him, his face half lit by the flames, and my heart raced. "Do I?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached out, his hand resting on mine. It was warm, steady, and I didn't pull away. For a moment, we just sat there, the fire crackling, the world outside forgotten. Then he leaned closer, and I hoped, he might kiss me. But he stopped, his breath catching, and pulled back. "I'm sorry," he muttered, standing abruptly. "I shouldn't." "It's okay," I said, my voice shaking. But he was already moving, grabbing his jacket and stepping outside into the rain. I sat there, my heart pounding, wondering what I'd done wrong. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the forest sparkled with fresh rain. Elias was quieter, avoiding my eyes as we ate breakfast. I wanted to ask what had happened, why he'd pulled away, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, we went back to our routine, checking traps, gathering wood, but the air between us was charged, heavy with things unsaid. That afternoon, we found a deer caught in one of his traps, its leg broken. Elias knelt beside it, his face tight with regret. "I don't kill for sport," he said, pulling a knife from his belt. "This one's suffering." I turned away as he ended it, quick and merciful. When I looked back, his hands were shaking, just slightly. I stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I've seen too much death," he said, almost to himself. "Out there. In here." I didn't know what he meant, but I felt his pain, raw and real. I squeezed his shoulder, and he looked at me, his eyes searching mine. For a moment, I thought he'd pull away again, but instead, he covered my hand with his, holding it there. That night, we sat closer by the fire. He didn't talk about the deer, or the war, or whatever haunted him. Instead, he asked about my dreams, the ones I'd buried under Nate's cruelty. I told him I wanted to design something real, something that mattered, not just logos for tech brothers. He listened, his eyes never leaving mine, and I felt seen in a way I never had before. As the fire died down, he reached for my hand again. This time, he didn't let go. By the 5th day, my ankle was strong enough to walk without pain, but I wasn't ready to leave. The cabin, the forest, Elias, they'd become a refuge, a place where I could breathe. But the tension between us was growing, a current that sparked every time our eyes met or our hands brushed. I knew he felt it too, but something held him back, a shadow I couldn't name. That morning, he took me to a ridge overlooking a valley, the mountains stretching endless and wild. The air was sharp, the sky a piercing blue. "This is why I stay," he said, gesturing to the view. "Out here, the world makes sense." I stood beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Do I make sense?" He turned to me, his eyes intense, searching. "You're the first thing that's made sense in a long time." My breath caught. Before I could think, I stepped closer, my hand finding his. He didn't pull away this time. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine, tentative at first, then deeper, hungrier. The kiss was fire and earth, raw and real, and I melted into it, my fears dissolving in his warmth. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven. "Lucas," he whispered, like my name was a prayer. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Let someone in," he said, his voice breaking. "I've been alone too long." I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You're not alone anymore." We kissed again, slower this time, and the world fell away. The forest, the past, the pain. There was only us, two broken souls finding each other in the wild. But the moment didn't last. That afternoon, as we returned to the cabin, we found tracks, human tracks, fresh and deliberate, circling the clearing. Elias's face darkened, his body tensing like a predator sensing danger. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his rifle. I grabbed his arm. What's going on? He didn't answer, just pulled away and disappeared into the trees. I stood there, heart racing, the forest suddenly menacing again. When he returned, his face was grim. Someone's watching, he said. They've been here before. Who? I asked, fear creeping back. He shook his head. I don't know, but we need to be careful. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the door, rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the dark. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him we'd be okay, but the truth was, I was scared too. The cabin, once a haven, now felt like a trap. As I lay on the cot, listening to the forest's restless sounds, I realized something. I was falling for Elias, hard and fast, but his past was catching up, and I didn't know if we'd survive it. The next morning, Elias was all business. He packed a small bag with supplies, food, water, a knife, and told me we were moving. It's not safe here, he said, his voice clipped. We'll head to a higher camp, harder to find. I wanted to argue, to stay in the cabin where we'd found something real, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He was scared, not just for me but for himself. I followed him into the forest, my heart heavy with questions I didn't dare ask. The hike was grueling, my ankle protesting as we climbed steep trails. Elias moved like a ghost, silent and alert, his rifle never far from his hand. I tried to keep up, but my mind was racing. Who was after him? What had he done to live like this, hidden away in the wild? We reached the camp by dusk, a small cave tucked into a cliff face, hidden by pines. Elias built a fire, the flames small but warm. We sat in silence, the weight of the day pressing down on us. Elias, I said finally, unable to hold it in. Who's out there? What are you running from? He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and raw. I was in the army. Special forces. Did things I'm not proud of. When I got out, I couldn't go back to a normal life. Too many ghosts. I waited, sensing there was more. Someone from my past, he continued. Someone I hurt. They've been looking for me. I thought I'd lost them, but those tracks he trailed off, his eyes haunted. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. You don't have to face it alone. He looked at me, his expression torn between fear and something softer. You don't know what you're signing up for, Lucas. I know I'm not leaving you, I said, my voice fierce. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me, and we held each other as the fire burned low. For the first time, I felt like we were in this together, no matter what came. But danger was closer than we thought. In the middle of the night, I woke to a sound, footsteps, deliberate and close. Elias was already up, rifle in hand, his body tense. Stay down, he whispered. I crouched in the shadows, my heart pounding, as a figure appeared at the cave's mouth. A man, tall and lean, with a scar across his cheek. He held a pistol, his eyes locked on Elias. Found you, the man said, his voice cold. Elias raised his rifle, his hand steady. Leave, Carter. This doesn't have to end badly. Carter laughed, a bitter sound. You owe me, Elias. You think you can run forever? I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. This was Elias's past, and it had found us. The air in the cave was thick with tension, the fire's glow casting jagged shadows on the walls. Carter stood at the entrance, his pistol glinting in the dim light, his eyes burning with a hatred I didn't understand but could feel. Elias faced him, rifle steady, but I saw the tremor in his jaw, the weight of whatever history they shared. You don't want this, Elias said, his voice low but firm. Walk away, Carter. Carter's laugh was sharp, cutting. You don't get to tell me what I want. Not after what you did. I stayed crouched, my heart hammering, trying to piece together the fragments of their past. Elias had said he'd hurt someone, but this? This was vengeance, raw and unrelenting. What happened? I blurted, unable to stay silent. Both men turned to me, Carter's eyes narrowing. Stay out of this, Carter snapped, but Elias held up a hand, his gaze never leaving the other man. He deserves to know, Elias said. Then, to me, Carter was my partner. In the army, We were close, too close. I made a call on a mission, and it got people killed, including his brother. Carter's face twisted, his grip tightening on the pistol. You left me to carry that, Elias. You ran. I didn't run, Elias said, his voice breaking. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face you. The confession hung between them, heavy and raw. I saw the pain in Elias's eyes, the guilt he'd carried all these years. And I saw the rage in Carter's, the wound that had never healed. Then face it now, Carter said, raising the pistol. I didn't think. I lunged forward, grabbing a rock from the cave floor and hurling it at Carter. It hit his shoulder, not hard, but enough to throw off his aim. The pistol fired, the sound deafening, and I screamed as Elias tackled me to the ground. The bullet missed, embedding in the cave wall. Elias was on his feet in an instant, charging Carter. They grappled, the rifle and pistol clattering to the ground. I scrambled for the rifle, my hands shaking, but I didn't know how to use it. All I could do was watch as Elias pinned Carter, his fist raised. Don't! I yelled, my voice echoing. Elias, don't! He froze, his chest heaving, Carter struggling beneath him. For a moment, I thought he'd do it, end it right there. But then he lowered his fist, his shoulders slumping. I'm done running, Elias said, his voice raw. I'm sorry, Carter. For everything. Carter stared up at him, his face a mix of fury and grief. Then, slowly, he nodded, like something had broken inside him too. Elias let him go, and Carter stood, grabbing his pistol but not raising it. This isn't over, Carter said, but his voice lacked the venom from before. He backed out of the cave, disappearing into the dark. We didn't move for a long time, the silence heavy. Finally, Elias turned to me, his face pale. You okay? He asked. I nodded, though I was shaking. You? He didn't answer, just pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was the only thing keeping him grounded. We stayed like that until dawn, the fire reduced to embers, the forest quiet again. The next morning, we packed up and hiked out of the mountains. Elias didn't talk about Carter, and I didn't push. But as we reached the trailhead, where my car waited, he stopped me, his hand on my arm. I'm not good at this, he said, his eyes searching mine. But I don't want you to go. My heart swelled, and I smiled, brushing my fingers against his. Then come with me. He hesitated, the weight of his past still there, but then he nodded. Okay. We drove back to Seattle, the city's lights a stark contrast to the wild we'd left behind. Elias moved into my apartment, a temporary arrangement that became permanent. He started working as a park ranger, teaching kids about the forest he loved. I went back to design, but this time, I poured my heart into it, creating art that told stories of survival and love. Carter never came back, but I knew Elias carried him, the way he carried me that first night in the woods. Our love wasn't perfect. It was messy, born in fear and fire, but it was real. And every night, as we lay together, I felt the warmth of the man who'd melted my fear, and I knew we'd found our way home.